Verna Poole scrubbed the church hall floor on her knees the morning they buried Deacon Ephraim Vane, the man half the county called a saint, the man whose land she had rented for 19 years, the man who was her own father, though not one soul in 3 states knew it yet. They paid her in a sack of seed corn to clean up after the funeral of the family that owned her cabin. She took it. She always took it. At the graveside, before 40 mourners in their Sunday black, Harlan Vane pressed a folded paper into her hand. A foreclosure notice. He leaned close so only she would hear. "You'll be off Vane land by the first frost. Washerwoman, charity has a season." She did not cry. She folded the paper smaller and kept sweeping the leaves off the path. And as the crowd thinned, the old family lawyer stopped at the fresh headstone. He frowned at a name the dying deacon had whispered the night before. A far parish, a church called Sparrow's Rest. He did not get into his automobile. He turned north. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Verna's story travels. Now come with me back to the autumn of 1937. Halloway County, Kentucky. The tobacco was in, hung brown and drying in the long barns, and the mornings had that first cold bite that tells you the year is turning under your feet. It was hill country, creek bottom land and ridgeland, red clay roads that turned to soup in the rain. Poor country, mostly. The Depression had sat on it for 8 years like a heavy man on a thin chair, and it had not gotten up. But there was one name in that county that stood above the mud: Ephraim Vane. For 30 years, Ephraim Vane had been the model deacon of Halloway. Say it that way, because that is how they said it. 30 years. He had knelt in the front pew of the Halloway Baptist Church every Sunday of those 30 years. He had put the first coin in the plate and the biggest. When the roof leaked, Ephraim Vane paid for the shingles. When the widow Tucker lost her husband under a falling wagon, Ephraim Vane carried her a ham and stayed to pray. He owned 640 acres of the best bottomland in 3 townships, and he tithed on all of it, and he made sure the parson knew he tithed on all of it. The county loved him. There is no other word. They loved him the way people love a thing that makes them feel their own place is blessed. If Halloway had produced a man that good, then Halloway must be a good place. And so every man who shook Ephraim Vane's hand felt a little of the saint rub off on his own palm. He had a way of speaking that made poverty sound like a favor he was doing you. "Now, you just stay on the place," he would say to a struggling tenant, laying that big warm hand on a shoulder. "The Lord gave me more than my share. Let me carry a little of yours." And the tenant would go home and tell his wife that Deacon Vane was a saint, and the wife would tell it at the well, and the story would travel. 19 years before, he had said that very thing to Verna Poole. She was a girl then, not yet 20, come down from the north with nothing but a trunk and her mother's things. Her mother, Susanna Poole, had died that spring. Quiet woman. Nobody in Halloway had known her. Verna arrived alone, and the deacon had taken her in, which meant he rented her a 2-room cabin on the far edge of his bottomland, down by the creek where the ground flooded every 3rd spring. He rented it to her. Mind, charity, the county called it. But there was $1 due the 1st of every month, and the deacon collected it himself. And never once was he late to collect. For 19 years, Verna Poole had paid that $1. She was 38 now. Thin the way work makes a woman thin, not the way sickness does. Strong hands, strong across the back. Her face was plain and steady and gave away almost nothing, and people mistook that stillness for simpleness, which suited her fine. She kept to herself. She kept the cabin clean enough to eat off the floor. And she worked. Lord, how she worked. She took in washing for half the hollow. She was the best hand with a needle in the county, and everybody knew it, so she mended and turned collars and let out seams and made over dead men's suits to fit their living sons. She was paid in eggs and in nickels and in a jar of apple butter and, once in a while, in actual coin. She raised a garden that would shame a man with a mule. She kept 2 hogs and a dozen hens and a milk cow named Belle, and between all of it she scratched out the $1 a month and the taxes and enough to eat, and she never once complained where a soul could hear her. On the mantel of the 2-room cabin sat one thing that was not useful. Her mother's hymnal. Small, black. The cover worn soft as cloth at the corners from being carried to church across a lifetime that had ended before Verna could remember much of it. Verna could not sing worth a nickel, but she kept that hymnal dusted. And on the hard nights, the nights the wind came down the creek and the cabin got to leaning into the cold, she would take it down and hold it and not open it. Just hold it. It was the only thing she had of her mother's face, which she could not remember, and her mother's voice, which she could not remember either. That was Verna Poole. Understand her before you meet the ones who thought they were better. The deacon had 2 children by his second wife, a marriage he'd made 20-odd years back to a Louisville woman with money of her own. Long since in the ground. Harlan and Lucretia. Harlan Vane was 44, thick through the middle, and carried himself like a man who had never once been told no and never expected to be. He ran the Vane land like it was a kingdom, and he the crown prince awaiting the crown. He wanted the whole 640 acres, clear and clean, the day his father died. And he counted on the saintly name coming to him along with the deed like a second inheritance. He was not a stupid man. But his arrogance was so complete, so bone-deep, that there were whole rooms in the world he simply could not imagine. Rooms where records were kept that he could not reach, truths written down that he could not burn. Lucretia Vane Crandall was 41, married off years back to a man named Crandall who did as he was told and was seldom seen. She wanted the cash. She wanted the standing. She wanted, above all, for the Vane name to keep its shine, because that shine was the floor she stood on, and she was terrified, though she'd never have said so, of that floor giving way. She was the one who kept the books when the old man's eyes went. She was the one who had signed the mortgage papers 2 years back when the family took a loan against the section to cover Harlan's bad year in tobacco. Signed them in her own tidy hand, certain as she was of her own name, that no one would ever have cause to check. And there was one more you should meet before the deacon's coffin goes into the ground. The lawyer. Thaddeus Bram. Old Mr. Bram had handled the Vane affairs for 30 years. He was near 70 now, dry and narrow, with spectacles he was forever cleaning, and a cough that came up out of him in the cold. He had drawn every deed, witnessed every contract, held every quiet secret the family owned. For 30 years he had kept those secrets, and told himself that keeping them was the same as being honest, which is a lie a good many honest men tell themselves. He wanted, at the end of his life, to die with a clean conscience. And he had begun to understand, that autumn, that he was not going to get to. Now, the dying. Ephraim Vane took to his bed in September and did not get up. It was his heart, the doctor said, though the family let it be known around the county that the deacon was simply worn out from a life of giving. He lingered 3 weeks. And the whole time, the county held its breath and prayed for its saint, and cooked for the family, and spoke of Ephraim Vane in the low reverent tones you use for a man already halfway to heaven. Verna Poole sent up a jar of her elderberry preserves by a neighbor boy. It was all she had to send. She did not go to the house. She had never once been asked into the house in 19 years, and she was not fool enough to think a deathbed changed that. He died on a Thursday night, and what happened at his deathbed you will learn in time, because it is the whole hinge of this story, and I am not going to hand it to you before it's earned. But hold this, there was a word. A last word the dying deacon spoke, gray with fear, to the one man who had kept all his secrets. And that word turned a lawyer's automobile north when it should have gone home. They buried him on Monday. It was the biggest funeral Halloway County had ever seen. They came from 4 counties over. The church could not hold them, so they held the service on the lawn, and the preacher stood on the steps and called Ephraim Vane a pillar and a light, and a friend to the friendless, and every word of it the county believed with its whole heart, and wept. Verna Poole was not at the service. She was inside the empty church hall, on her knees, scrubbing the floor for the reception that would come after. Lucretia had sent word 2 days before. There'd be a gathering in the hall following the burial, and the hall needed doing. Floors and windows and the long tables set. Verna would do it. And her pay? A sack of seed corn. That was the wage, a sack of seed corn, for 2 days cleaning and the cooking help besides, at the funeral of the man who owned the roof over her head. Lucretia had named it like she was being generous. "Papa always said you were reliable," she'd said, and turned away before Verna could answer, which was just as well because Verna had nothing to say that would have kept her cabin another month. So while the county buried its saint on the lawn, Verna scrubbed. She heard the hymns come muffled through the walls. She knew the words she could not sing. And when the burying was done and the mourners drifted toward the hall, hungry the way people always are after a funeral, ashamed of being hungry and hungry anyhow, Verna was already there. Apron on. Coffee made. The tables laid with the food the neighbor women had brought. And that is where the county's kindness showed its lining. The elders came through first. Good men, by their own reckoning. They filled their plates, and they stood in their little knots, and they talked of the deacon. And more than one of them, seeing Verna moving among the tables with the coffee pot, took the chance to tell her, to her face, how blessed she had been. "You know," said old Deacon Sims, catching her arm as she poured, "you ought to count yourself fortunate, Verna. Ephraim Vane carried you 19 years on that creek place. 19 years. There's not another man in this county would have done it. A single woman, no husband, no people. He kept a roof over you out of pure Christian charity." He shook his head, moved by his own words. "We'll not see his like again." "No, sir," Verna said. "We won't." And she filled his cup and moved on, and her face gave away exactly nothing. They meant it kindly. That's the part that cuts. They stood in the hall she'd scrubbed on her knees for a sack of corn, eating off the tables she'd laid. And they praised the dead man's generosity to the very woman he'd charged $1 a month for 19 years to live in a house that flooded. And they could not see it. They were so full of the story of Ephraim Vane the saint that there was no room left in them to see the actual woman standing there with the pot. Somebody near the window said it. The thing they all believed. The man kept careful books, I'll tell you that. Every good deed he ever done, wrote down and accounted for. Right there in the church register. Every kindness. Man'll stand before the Lord with his ledger clean. That was the register. Hold on to that word. The county said it like praise. Every good deed written down. They had no idea what a register could hold. Verna heard it and thought nothing of it. She was thinking of the dishes. She got home to the cabin past dark, the sack of seed corn over her shoulder, her knees aching, the smell of other people's supper in her hair. She set the corn in the lean-to. She milked Belle in the dark by feel. And when she'd done all of it, she lit the lamp and took her mother's hymnal down off the mantel and sat with it a while, the way she did on the hard nights. She turned to the flyleaf. She had looked at it 1,000 times. There was writing there, faded almost to nothing, brown on the yellowed page, in a hand she did not know. Her mother's hand, maybe. She could make out only pieces. Words the years had eaten. She'd worn her eyes out over it by lamplight more nights than she could count. She could read one line, part of one line, that she had read 100 times and never understood. Married this day at Sparrow's Rest, that was all. Married this day at Sparrow's Rest. The rest was gone. There was a date, she thought, at the end of it, but the ink had lifted clean off the page and left only a ghost, and she had never once been able to make out the year. Sparrow's Rest. She didn't know the place. Some church up north, she'd always supposed, where her mother had come from, though her mother had never spoken of it that Verna could remember. Married this day. Whose marriage? Her mother's, she'd always figured. To the father she'd never known. The father nobody had ever named to her. The father she'd stopped asking about before she was 10 because the asking only made her mother go quiet and stare at the wall. She ran her thumb over the faded line, the way she had 1,000 times. Then she closed the book and set it back on the mantel and went to bed. Because morning came early and the frost was coming and she had 11 days. 11 days. That was the other thing Lucretia had made sure she knew. The probate reading was set for the last day of harvest court. 11 days off. And Verna was to be gone from the cabin before it. Off Vane land, the notice said. The notice Harlan had pressed into her hand at the graveside with 40 people watching. The notice she had folded small and put in her apron pocket and had not yet been able to make herself unfold again. Off by the first frost. And the frost, any farmer could tell you, was near. She had 19 years in that cabin. 19 years of a garden dug and dug again till the soil was black and rich as a widow's cake. 19 years of a life scraped together a nickel and an egg at a time. And she was to leave it, in 11 days, for a place she did not have, with a sack of seed corn and whatever she could carry. She did not weep about it. Weeping was a thing Verna Poole had mostly given up as a poor use of water. But she did lie awake that night and the night after, doing the sums that would not come out. Where she would go. What she would eat come winter. Whether Belle could be sold or would have to be. And to whom. And for how little. And in the days that followed, the offenses did not stop. They came steady, the way rain comes, till you stop noticing you're wet. There was the matter of the last dollar. Verna, who had paid her rent on the first of every month for 19 years without fail, meant to leave owing nothing. She'd sooner have starved. So on the 1st of October, dispossessed or not, she walked the 2 miles up to the big house to pay the dollar she owed for the month, so she could leave clean. Harlan took it on the porch. Did not ask her in. He looked at the dollar in his palm like it was a joke somebody was playing on him. "You're paying rent," he said, "on a house you're evicted out of." "I owe the month," Verna said. "I'll leave owing nothing." He laughed. He actually laughed and pocketed the dollar. "Reliable," he said, echoing his sister without knowing it. Papa always said. And he turned and went inside and let the door close, and Verna walked the 2 miles home having paid rent to be thrown out. Which, if you think about it a moment, is a thing only a certain kind of pride will do. And a certain kind of cruelty will let you. Then there was the reception's second act, if you want to call it that. The reading of the honor roll. Some days after the burying, the family held a gathering at the big house for the leading men of the county. The elders, the banker, the 2 lawyers, the men who ran Halloway. A memorial, they called it. And at the height of it, with the whole front room full of the county's best, Harlan Vane brought out his father's ledger. He stood by the mantel, a real mantel, marble, in a room bigger than Verna's whole cabin, and he opened the great book, and he read aloud the roll of his father's charities. The hams given, the rents forgiven, the struggling families the deacon had carried on his own back for the love of Christ. The room went soft and reverent, and the men nodded, and some had wet eyes. Because there is nothing a comfortable man loves better than proof that a rich man is good. And Harlan, warming to it, came to the bottom of the page. "And here," he said, "here's the chief of them. The Creek place. 19 years my father housed a woman down there out of pure charity. Verna Poole. No kin to us, no claim on us. Nothing to recommend her but need. 19 years. He shut the book. That was the man my father was. He gave, and he kept the account, and he asked nothing back." The room murmured its amen. Now Verna was not in that room. She was never in that room. But it was a small county, and by the next afternoon 3 separate women had come to her cabin to tell her, breathless, kindly, what a fine thing had been said about her in front of all those important men. Named aloud, the chief of the deacon's charities. Wasn't she proud? Wasn't it a blessing to be remembered so? Verna thanked them. She gave one of them a jar of preserves for coming. And when they'd gone, she stood in the doorway of the cabin she was losing and looked out over the garden she'd made and the creek that had flooded her out 3 times. And she understood something all the way down that she had only half understood before. They would never see her. Not any of them. To that whole county she was not a woman. She was a good deed. A line in a dead man's ledger. A story the county told itself to feel warm. And you cannot be wronged in the eyes of people like that, because a line in a ledger has nothing to be wronged about. It only sits there and proves how generous the man was who wrote it. She did not cry. But that was the night, I think, that something in Verna Poole went very still and very clear. Not bitter. She hadn't the leisure for bitter. Just clear. She would leave. She would leave in 11 days, or 9 now, and she would leave owing not one soul one thing. And she would carry her dignity out of that hollow if it was the only thing she got to keep. She would not beg. She would not claim. She had nothing to claim, and she knew it, and she had made her peace with knowing it a long time ago. That is the thing you must understand about her, and hold to it through everything that comes. Verna Poole never once schemed for what was hers. It never crossed her mind that anything was hers. That is exactly why she deserved it. So she began to pack. There wasn't much. 19 years, and it fit in a trunk and 2 crates and a tow sack. The quilts. The good iron skillet. The needle things, her thread and her thimble and her shears, which were her livelihood and worth more to her than gold. The hymnal, wrapped in a flour sackcloth and laid on the top of the trunk where nothing could crush it. And down in the bottom of the flour bin, where it had lain 19 years and longer, wrapped in a rag gone stiff with age, she found the cup. She had forgotten it, near enough. Her mother's cup. She unwrapped it there on the cabin floor by lamplight, and the rag fell away, and there it was, catching the light dull and soft. Pewter, a little cup, no bigger than would hold a swallow of milk. A christening cup, the kind a baby is given at its baptism, to keep its whole life. Her mother had hidden it in the flour bin, and Verna had known it was there, the way you know a thing from childhood without ever thinking on it, and she had never once taken it out to look. She looked at it now. She turned it to the lamp. There were initials engraved on the side. Worn, but clear enough. 2 letters, and they were not P's, not Poole. She rubbed her thumb across them and held it to the light and made them out, and they meant nothing to her. Nothing at all, because she did not know the name they stood for. She had never been told the name. She frowned at the little cup a while. This baby's cup with a stranger's letters on it, hidden in the flour of a woman too poor to own pewter. And then she wrapped it back up, because she could not make sense of it and there was too much else to do, and she laid it in the trunk beside the hymnal. She did not understand it. But you might be starting to. Now I have to take you away from Verna's cabin for a spell. Because the thing that was going to change everything had already started to move, and it moved in the dark, without her, the way the biggest turns in a life so often do. Go back to the deathbed. 3 weeks the deacon lingered, and toward the end he was not always in his right mind. And toward the very end he was afraid. Ephraim Vane, the county's saint, the man with the clean ledger, lay dying, and he was afraid, and it was not the ordinary fear of a man leaving the world. It was a particular fear. The fear of a man who has kept the books on everyone but himself and knows there is one account, somewhere, that he never squared. Thaddeus Bram sat with him the last night. 30 years' loyalty put him in that chair. The family was worn out and gone to bed. The nurse dozed in the hall. And it was just the 2 old men, the dying one and the one who'd kept his secrets, in the yellow lamplight with the clock going. And Ephraim Vane, gray and sweating, gripped the lawyer's dry hand with the last strength in him, and pulled him close, and whispered. 2 words. Just 2. Sparrow's rest. That was all. He said it. And his eyes were terrible when he said it, full of a lifetime he'd never let anyone read. And then he fell back, and did not speak sense again, and by the gray of morning he was gone, saint of Halloway County, and the whole world grieved him. But Thaddeus Bram sat in that chair a long while after the breath stopped, and he did not ring for the family. Not right away. Because in 30 years of Ephraim Vane's business, Thaddeus Bram had never once heard the word Sparrow's Rest. And a lawyer who has kept a man's every secret for 30 years knows exactly how much it means when a dying man spends his last breath on a secret the lawyer never held. He knew it was a place. He was old enough and had read enough county maps to half remember it, a little parish, far off, across the state line into Virginia, up in the high hollows where the roads gave out. A church. Sparrow's Rest. And he could not let it lie. He told himself he could. He told himself, riding home in the dawn, that whatever it was had died with the old man and was none of his affair, that his affair was the will and the deeds and the orderly settling of a great estate, and that a dying man's wandering word was just that, a wandering. He told himself so all through the funeral. He stood at the graveside and watched Harlan Vane press a paper into a washerwoman's hand. And he heard the old man's word going round and round in his head. Sparrow's Rest. Sparrow's Rest, like a stone in a shoe. And when the burying was done and the mourners turned toward the hall and their supper, Thaddeus Bram stood alone at the new headstone a moment, frowning, and then he walked to his automobile, and he cranked it, and he sat behind the wheel with his hands on it. He should have turned it toward home, toward Halloway Town and his dusty office and the great clean settling of the Vane estate, the last big work of his life, the work that was going to let him retire with his name intact. He turned it north. He did not tell the family. He did not tell a soul. An old man's conscience is a quiet thing, and it moves quietly. And Thaddeus Bram drove north out of Halloway County that afternoon with nothing but a dead man's 2 words and 30 years of small silences riding in the seat beside him, and he went to find a church he had never seen, to read a register he did not know existed, to learn a thing that was going to break the Vane family in 2. It took him the better part of 2 days. The roads were bad and got worse. Up into the Virginia hills, where the hollows fold in on each other and every ridge looks like the last, and a man can drive an hour and gain 3 miles. He asked at crossroads stores. Sparrow's Rest? Old-timers scratched their heads. One knew it, sent him up a road that was more creek than road, and it was that road, coming home, that would nearly finish him. But that comes later. He found it on the second evening. A little white frame church, gone gray with weather, standing in a clearing with a burying ground beside it, and the mountains going up blue behind. Sparrow's Rest. And an old preacher who kept it. A Reverend Ames, near as old as Bram himself, who had held that parish more than 40 years and kept its register in his own hand the whole time. And here I have to stop and leave the old lawyer standing at that far church door in the mountain dusk with his hand raised to knock and the whole weight of what he came for on the other side of it. Because back in Halloway County the frost was coming, and the days were running out, and Verna Poole was folding the last of her life into a trunk, the hymnal on top. The little pewter cup with the wrong initials wrapped beside it, neither of them knowing yet the story they told together. She had 9 days. And on the night the rain came, the hard, cold, sideways rain that turns the creek fords to torrents and strands a man far from home, there would be an automobile foundering in the water at the bottom of Verna's road. A stranger's automobile. An old man in it, soaked and shaking, his coat ruined, carrying inside his coat a thing wrapped in oilcloth that he had copied out in his own hand by lamplight in a far mountain parish. And Verna Poole, who owed the world nothing and had nothing and expected nothing, was going to hear that engine drown in the ford and take her lantern down off its nail and go out into the rain to help a stranger she had never seen. She did not know who he was. She did not know what he carried. But you're beginning to, aren't you? The engine drowned first. A cough, a gargle, then nothing. Just the roar of the ford, and the rain coming down like it meant to wash the whole county into the Ohio. Verna heard it from her bed. She was not sleeping. Folks who are being put off their land in 9 days do not sleep much. She lay there and listened, and she knew that sound. She had heard it before, a car caught in the creek where the road dipped underwater. 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, nobody would come. Nobody ever came out this far. So she got up. She took her mother's shawl from the peg. She took the lantern down off its nail and lit it, and the little flame shivered in the draft under the door. She did not think about whether she should go. She was not the kind of woman who weighed a thing like that. A man was in the water. That was the whole of it. The rain hit her like a hand the second she stepped out. Cold, sideways, it went straight through the shawl and through her nightgown and found the bone. She held the lantern up and went down the road that was more creek than road now, the mud sucking at her feet. She found the automobile nose down in the ford, water to the running boards, the current shoving at it. And a man inside. An old man, white-headed, both hands locked on the wheel like the wheel could save him, his mouth working but no sound coming out that she could hear over the water. "Give me your hand," she called. "Give me your hand now, before she rolls." He turned his head. His face was gray. He was near 70 if he was a day, and he was shaking so hard she could see it from the bank. "My case," he said. She barely caught it. "My coat. Don't let the water get my coat." Fool thing to say, drowning in a creek and worried about a coat. But she reached in through the window and got a grip on him and pulled, and he came, heavy and slow, out into the water that pushed at both of them and near took her off her feet. She got his arm over her shoulder. She got the lantern in her free hand. And she hauled him up the road, 1 step at a time. An old man who could barely stand, and a woman who had nothing left in her but the habit of doing what was in front of her. She did not know his name. She did not know that inside the coat he clutched to his chest, wrapped in oilcloth against the rain, was the one thing in 3 states that could give her back everything the world had taken. She only knew he was cold. She got him inside. She set him in the good chair by the hearth, the one that had been her mother's, and she built the fire up high with wood she could not spare, because a man his age, wet to the skin on a night like this, could die of the chill by morning. She peeled the ruined coat off him. She hung it on the back of the chair to steam. She never looked in the pockets. It would not have crossed her mind to look. "You'll want dry things," she said. She had none that would fit him, but she had her father's old she had a quilt. She wrapped him in the quilt. "I'm putting you to trouble," he said through his teeth. "You're not." She had a scrap of ham left. The last of it. She had been saving it, though for what she could not have said, there was no feast coming in her life. She put it in the skillet with an onion, and the smell of it filled the 2 small rooms, and she made him eat, spooning it near into him herself, when his hands shook too bad to hold the spoon. He watched her the whole while. This gray old man. He watched her move about the cabin like she was a thing he was trying to read. "You live here alone," he said. 19 years. "And they're putting you off." She looked at him. "How would you know that?" He didn't answer straight. "A man hears things," he said. "In this county." She let it go. She was not one to pry. She banked the fire and she gave him her own bed over his protesting. And she took the pallet by the hearth for herself, and she blew out the lantern. And in the dark, she heard the old man weeping. Quiet, trying to hide it. An old man crying in her mother's bed, and she did not know why, and she did not ask. She figured a man that age had earned his griefs and had a right to them in private. She did not know he was weeping for her. Morning came gray and wrung out. The rain had quit. Verna was up before light, as always, and she took the coat down to see to it, because a body did not leave a fine wool coat to dry stiff and cracked if a needle and thread could save it. That was her trade. That was the one thing she had. She turned it in the window light. And as she turned it, the weight of it shifted. Something inside. She reached into the breast of it, careful, and her fingers found a packet, oilcloth, tied with string, dry as a bone though the coat was soaked. She did not open it. It was not hers. But the old man was awake. He had come to the door of the bedroom, the quilt still round his shoulders, and he was watching her hold that packet, and his face had gone strange. "Set it down, please," he said. "Soft, set it on the table there." She set it down. "I wasn't looking to pry. I was seeing to your coat. I know it." He came forward slow. He sat at her table, and he looked at the mantel, at the poor few things on it, and his eye stopped. The hymnal, and beside it, where she had set it out to pack, the little pewter cup. His breath went out of him. "Where?" he said, and had to start again. "Where did you get that cup, child?" "It was my mother's. It was in the flour bin, wrapped up, all these years. I only found it this week, packing." She turned it in her hand, the way she'd done 100 times, and read again the little letters cut into it that had never made a lick of sense to her. "It's got the wrong letters. It's not a P for pool. I never could figure it. Some cup she got second-hand, I always thought." The old man put his face in his hands. "May I see the book?" he said. "The hymnal, may I?" She gave it to him. He opened it to the flyleaf with fingers that shook worse than they had in the flood, and he read the faded lines she had read her whole life and never wholly understood. "Married this day at Sparrow's Rest," and below it a name half gone in the worn ink, and a year she had never been able to make out. 19 and, he whispered. "No, 1899, it's here, it's the same. God have mercy, it's the same hand." "Sir," said Verna, "you're frightening me. What is it? What's wrong with my mother's things?" He looked up at her. This lawyer, this Thaddeus Bram. 30 years the keeper of the Vane family's small silences, 30 years loyal to a dead man who had never once deserved it. He looked up at the washerwoman who had pulled him from the creek and fed him her last ham and asked him for nothing. "There is nothing wrong with them," he said. "There is everything right with them. And I have to tell you a thing now that is going to be very hard to hear." She sat down across from him. She folded her hands in her lap the way her mother had taught her. "Go on then. My name is Thaddeus Bram. I was, the lawyer for the Vane family. For Deacon Ephraim Vane, that they buried 11 days ago." He watched her face. "The man whose land you rent. The man they call a saint. I know who Ephraim Vane was." "No," said Bram. "You don't. Nobody in this county does. I'm only now coming to know it myself, and I am ashamed it took me this long and a dying man's whisper to send me looking." And he told her. He told her about the deathbed, how the deacon, near the end, terrified out of his wits, terrified of the judgment he'd preached 30 years, had gripped Bram's wrist and said 2 words and only 2 words with any sense left in them. Sparrow's Rest. And how Bram had sat with that after the burying and could not let it go. Because he had been a lawyer 60 years, and he knew what it sounded like when a man was trying to confess a thing he'd hid. He told her about the road north. 2 days of it. The little gray church in the clearing with the mountains going up blue behind. Reverend Ames, near 70 himself, 40 years and more the keeper of that parish and its register. All of it in his own hand. I read the register. Verna. He said her name careful, like it was new. I read it by his lamp. And I want you to hear what is written in it, in ink witnessed 40 years old and never touched. He opened the oilcloth packet on her table. Inside was a page in his own copying, and the old reverend's mark below to swear it true. In the year 1899, he read, at the church of Sparrow's Rest, across the Virginia line, Ephraim Vane was lawfully married, before witnesses, before God, to a woman named Susanna. The cup fell out of Verna's hand, it rolled on the floor, and she did not reach for it. "That's my mother's name," she said. "Susanna, I know it is. But she never. She came down here from the north. A widow, folks said. The deacon took her in. Charity, they said. Housed her girl out of Christian. There was no charity, said Bram, and his voice broke on it. There was never any charity. He married her. Girl, he married your mother in that far church where nobody down here would ever go looking, years before he ever married the woman that bore Harlan and Lucretia. She was his wife. His first and lawful wife. The room was very quiet. The fire ticked. And there's a second entry, said Bram. Under the marriage. In the same hand. A baptism. He looked at her, and he could barely get it out. A child, baptized at Sparrow's Rest. Firstborn, named in the book. The christening cup, he nodded at where it lay on her floor. The little pewter cup with the wrong initials. The letters on that cup are the child's initials, not Poole. Vane, Verna Poole, sat at her own table in her own cabin that they were putting her out of in 9 days, and she could not speak. You, said Thaddeus Bram. The child in that book is you. You are Ephraim Vane's firstborn. You are his lawful daughter. And by every law of this state you are the first and only true heir to everything he owned. The 640 acres. This ground. The house they read his ledger in. All of it. It was always yours. She did not cry. Understand that. She had not cried at the seed corn, nor at the notice pressed into her hand over her father's grave, nor at Harlan holding her up before the county as the chief of the charity cases. She did not cry now. She said, "He took $1 from me. Every month. 19 years. $1 a month rent. On my own ground." "Yes," said Bram, "he did. My own father." "Yes," she stood up. She picked the cup up off the floor and set it back on the mantel, gentle, the way she'd have set down a sleeping child. Then she stood with her back to the old man for a while, and her shoulders were very straight. "What do I do?" she said. Not asking for herself. She had never once in her life asked for herself. "There's the family, Harlan. The lady. They'll not want to hear it." "No," said Bram grimly. "They will not. And that is why you will do nothing, and I will do everything, and quickly. Because a record like this, in the wrong hands, has a way of catching fire." He was righter than he knew. He left her cabin that afternoon in his dried coat, the copy back in his breast pocket, his automobile hauled from the Ford by a neighbor's mule team. And he did a thing he thought was careful. He went to the county courthouse, and he asked to see the county's own book of marriages, the transcription clerks kept of records brought in from other parishes. Thinking to lay a second stone on the record's grave, thinking 2 copies safer than 1. And, in asking, he was seen. Harlan Vane was a suspicious man by nature, and his father's lawyer taking a 2-day trip north in the middle of the estate settling had already set him itching. When word came to him that old Bram had been in the courthouse pawing through the marriage books, asking after Sparrow's Rest, Harlan did not itch anymore. He acted. He cornered the old man on the courthouse steps. "You've been north," Harlan said. "Don't trouble to lie, I know it. And now you're in the county book after some hill church. What are you about, Bram? What did my father say to you before he died?" And Bram, who was 70 and tired and not the liar Harlan was, hesitated 1/2 second too long. That was enough. Harlan Vane had spent his whole life reading men for the thing they didn't want to say. "There's a paper," Harlan breathed. "Isn't there? Some old thing of his. Sparrow's Rest." His face worked. "It's about the washerwoman. It's about that Poole woman." "Harlan, how much of my land does it cost me, this paper?" "It was never your land," said Bram, quiet, and he should not have said it, but he was an old man, and he'd carried the truth so long it came out of him like a cough. "Not 1 acre of it. Not ever." Harlan went white, then red. He turned and left the old man on the steps. He did not go home. He went to the clerk of the county, a man who owed the Vane family favors going back years, and behind a shut door money changed hands. That night the clerk let Harlan into the records room alone with a lamp, and Harlan Vane found the page, the county's transcribed copy of the Sparrow's Rest marriage, brought down and entered years back and forgotten, and he tore it clean out of the book. He carried it to the little iron stove in the corner where the clerks burned their trash. He opened the door of it, he fed the page into the coals and watched it curl and blacken and go to nothing. And he stood there in the red light of the stove, and he smiled, because he believed with his whole arrogant heart that he had just burned the only proof that existed on God's earth, that the record was gone, that his father's sin was ash, that the 640 acres were his, clean, forever. He did not know about Reverend Ames. He did not know about the original 40 years in one old man's careful hand, safe across the Virginia line in a church so far up a creek road that no Vane had ever set foot in it. He did not know a thing. He went home and told Lucretia it was handled. And Lucretia, who kept the family books, who 2 years back had signed the mortgage papers against the whole Vane section without a flicker, certain no soul would ever check whose land it truly was, told him good, and moved the probate reading forward. To Monday, the harvest court day. She would have the estate settled and sealed, and the washerwoman gone before any lawyer's foolishness could ripen. They served Verna her final notice that same week. Off the land by the first frost, and the frost was near. You could smell it mornings now. And they added to it, out of pure grasping spite, a bill. $1,180 they called it in back taxes owed on the cabin, a figure Lucretia invented at her own desk that no honest ledger anywhere would show. Pay it or be taken up for it. A poor washerwoman who earned in eggs and pennies. $1,180. It looked, that week, like the end of everything. It looked like the arrogant family had won, the way they always won, the way that kind always wins. But Thaddeus Brahm had gone home from those courthouse steps and understood in one cold flash exactly what Harlan would do. And he had done the one thing that mattered. He had written to Reverend Ames. And he had sent a second letter sworn and stamped to the harvest court itself. And when Harlan Vane burned that county page and stood grinning in the stovelight, believing the record dead, the truth was already coming down out of the Virginia mountains on the seat of a wagon, the old Reverend Ames himself, and the original register in his lap, wrapped in a cloth, riding 2 days to a county he'd never seen to speak for a woman he'd never met, because the county copy had only ever been a transcription, a shadow of the thing. And the thing itself, the real book, the 40-year hand, was beyond Halloway's reach and always had been. Monday came. The 1st of October. The harvest court sat in the same county courthouse where, 30 years running, Ephraim Vane had been pointed out as the finest Christian in 3 counties. The room was full. A settling of the Vane estate drew everybody. The man had been a legend, and legend's money is a public show. 40 people, maybe more, on the hard benches. The same faces from the graveside. Harlan up front, easy, sure of himself, his father's ledger under his hand. Lucretia beside him, straight-backed, her husband Mr. Crandall a step behind her doing as he was told, saying nothing, the way he always did. The church elders in a row, the ones who had praised the deacon's careful books to Verna's own face while she swept up after them. And Verna Poole at the very back, in her one good dress. Asked to come by Mr. Brahm, and told nothing more than to come and to sit and to wait and to leave the rest to older heads. The clerk read the estate, the land, the house, the accounts. Harlan half rose to accept it all, the whole 640 acres, as the elder son and heir. And Thaddeus Brahm stood up. "Before the bench seals a thing," said the old lawyer, "there is a witness this court must hear. He has come a long way to be heard." And the door at the back opened, and an old man came in that nobody in Halloway County had ever seen. White-headed, mountain-worn, a cloth bundle held against him with both arms like it was an infant. He came up the aisle slow, and he set his bundle on the clerk's table, and he unwrapped it, and it was a book. An old, plain, thick book, its spine cracked with age. "My name is Ames," he said, and his voice was thin but it carried. "I have kept the parish of Sparrow's Rest, over the Virginia line, 41 years. I keep its register in my own hand. Every soul married, baptized, or buried in that church I set down. I have never lost a page, and I have never changed one." He looked at Harlan. No man can burn what he cannot reach. Harlan's face began to change. "I will read," said Reverend Ames. 2 entries. He opened the book to a place he had marked, and in that packed and silent room he read, in an old man's careful voice, the first. "In the year of our Lord 1899. Married this day at Sparrow's Rest, before God and these witnesses, Ephraim Vane of Halloway County, Kentucky, and Susanna of this parish." The room made a sound, a single low sound, 40 people drawing breath at once. "That's a lie," said Harlan on his feet. "That's a forgery. My father was never—" "Sit down, Mr. Vane," said the bench. Reverend Ames waited. Then he turned a leaf, gentle, and read the second entry. "In the year 1900, baptized this day at Sparrow's Rest, the firstborn and only lawful issue of Ephraim Vane and his wife Susanna, a daughter. Named in this book, Verna and Thaddeus Bram stepped to the clerk's table, and he set down beside the open register a small thing that clicked on the wood. A pewter christening cup. He turned it so the room could see the letters cut into it. The initials on this cup, said Bram, are the child's, given at that baptism. They are not the initials of Poole. He let it sit. They are Vane. And they match, letter for letter, the name in the Reverend's book. The room went so quiet you could hear the stove. Every head turned. Slow, all together, like a field of wheat turning under wind. They turned to the back bench, to the washerwoman in her one good dress who had scrubbed this county's floors, who had mended its clothes for eggs, who had been named to their faces the chief of a dead man's charity cases. Verna Poole, Verna Vane. Sitting very still, her hands folded in her lap, her mother's daughter. Her father's firstborn and the only lawful heir to every foot of ground these people were sitting on. Harlan Vane came up off his bench like something scalded. No. His voice cracked clean in half on it. No, she's a tenant. She's a washerwoman. My father housed her out of charity. Everyone knows it. Everyone here knows it. He swung round to the benches, to the county, wild now. You heard him say it at the grave. You heard me name her. Charity. My father said it himself. Charity has a season, and hers is her season, said Thaddeus Bram, and he did not raise his voice at all, and that was what stopped the room cold, is not the one that's ended, Mr. Vane. Harlan turned on him. Yours is, said the old lawyer. Sit down. But Harlan could not sit. He stood there with his father's ledger sliding off the table, 40 years of a family's standing coming apart in front of the whole county, and he did the last arithmetic left to him, and it was worse than he knew. Because Bram turned to the bench and laid the fourth thing down, the thing that broke the family's back. There is more this court must understand, Bram said. If the daughter Verna is the firstborn and lawful heir, and she is, by this register, sworn by its keeper, then the second family never held clear title to the Vane section. Not one day. It was hers from the hour of her father's death, and hers in trust before that. He let it settle, which means the mortgage taken against these 640 acres 2 years past. The loan drawn on this land as security was taken against property that was never lawfully theirs to pledge. Every eye went to Lucretia. Lucretia Vane Crandall had sat through the marriage and the baptism with her chin up and her face a stone. But she understood money the way her brother understood men, and she understood, in that instant, faster than Harlan ever could, exactly what she had done. She had signed those papers herself, in her own hand, at her own desk. Certain no one would ever check whose land it truly was. She had signed a fraud. Pledged land that belonged to the woman on the back bench. Her name was on it, in ink. A matter of record, in a book, forever, the very thing her family had just been undone by. A book had ended them, and now a book held her own signature under a lie, and there was no far mountain to hide that one in. The stone of her face broke, just at the mouth, just at the eyes. She reached out and gripped the edge of the table, and Mr. Crandall, her husband who did as he was told and was seldom seen, took one step forward and then did not know what he was told to do. and stopped. Useless, as he had always been. 2 years, Lucretia said, to no one. Very low. 2 years and no one ever, and she shut her mouth on it. Because there is nothing to say when your own hand has written the noose. The bench spoke then, and the bench was not a Vane. And the bench had watched a saint come apart in the space of 10 minutes and was in no mood for mercy. This court finds the register of Sparrow's Rest, kept and sworn by its keeper of 41 years and testified by counsel of long standing, to be true and sufficient. The gavel. The Vane section, 640 acres, is restored entire to the lawful heir, Verna, daughter of Ephraim and Susanna Vane. Another. The mortgage drawn against it is void, taken against land held by fraud. And the parties to that fraud will answer for it. And the bench looked at Harlan Vane over its spectacles, and it said the thing that finished him. Further, this court calls for a full accounting of all rents collected upon this land these 19 years past, by Ephraim Vane and by his son and executor Harlan, from the lawful owner, to be repaid, with interest, to Verna Vane. 19 years of dollars. Every dollar a month, collected off her own ground. To be counted up and paid back to her by the man who had pressed a foreclosure notice into her hand over an open grave. Harlan Vane sat down at last. He sat down because his legs would not hold him. He did not speak again. And the row of church elders, the ones who had praised the careful books, the parish register where every good deed is written, the deacon's generosity, those men sat in their row and looked at their hands, at the floor, at the windows, anywhere but at the back bench. Anywhere but at the woman they had called a charity case to her face. They could not meet her eyes. Not one of them. The whole 30-year sainthood they had built and polished and repeated to each other Sunday on Sunday sat on them now like a debt they could not pay, and every soul in that room knew it. Then Verna Poole stood up. She came forward slow. Down the aisle the register had cleared, past the benches where the county turned to watch her. Past the elders who could not look, past her half-brother sunk in his chair and her half-sister white as her own signature. She stopped at the clerk's table where the open book lay and the little cup stood beside it. She did not gloat. Hear that. She had never schemed for 1 inch of this, and she did not crow over it now. She had asked the world for nothing her whole life, and she was not about to start with a courtroom full of people who had wronged her. She put her hand on the old register, light, the way she touched her mother's hymnal. "Reverend Ames," she said, "you came a long way for a woman you never met. I thank you." She turned. "Mr. Bram, you pulled me out of a creek by pulling yourself into one. I thank you too." Then she looked at the book under her hand, and then at Harlan, and she said the only hard thing she said that whole day. She said it quiet. She said it the way you lay something down that you're finally done carrying. Your father wrote his good deeds in a book, Mr. Vane, 30 years of them. Every dollar he gave, every Sunday he sat up front. She let it rest. He forgot the book, kept his true one, too. Nobody breathed. "I've the one thing to ask this court," Verna said. And she turned to the bench, and it was not for land, and it was not for money, and it was not for the 19 years of dollars. My mother was a married woman, lawful and true, in the sight of God and this register. But this county buried her a widow of no name, and never wrote her down anywhere as anybody's wife. Her voice held very steady. I'd ask that her name be set at last in the Halloway church book, beside my father's. Susanna Vane. So it's true here too, and not only in the mountains. The bench, that hard old man, was quiet a moment. Then he said, "It will be entered," and his voice was not hard when he said it. And that was the whole of what Verna Vane asked, the day she came into 640 acres. A line in a book for her mother. The reverent hush that came down on that courtroom then crushed the Vane family harder than any shouting ever could. Because the county had come to seal a saint's estate, and instead it had watched a saint unmade and a washerwoman lifted. And it had learned in one October hour that the humble woman scrubbing its floors had been the rightful owner of the ground the whole time, and that she was a better soul than the man they'd worshipped, by every measure that a person's measured by. There is no punishment for arrogance like being made small in front of the very people who made you great. They filed out slow. Nobody said much. What was there to say? Now let me tell you how it ended. Because a thing like this shouldn't be left in a courtroom. It was spring on the bottomland when I saw the last of it. The frost that Harlan Vane had promised her had come and gone, and Verna Vane had never left. The two-room cabin still stood, but it was the heart of a working section now, 640 acres green and coming up, and there were hands in the fields who were glad of honest wages, and wash on the line snapping white in a warm wind. Her mother's hymnal lay open on a real mantel, in a real house, in the light. And the little pewter christening cup with the initials that were never Poole stood beside it, not hidden in any flower bin now, not wrapped against any prying eye. It held a fistful of wildflowers a fieldhand's child had picked and brought up to the house. That was all it was good for anymore. And that was enough. Far off across the Virginia line, in the little gray church in the clearing with the mountains going up blue behind it, Reverend Ames's register was set under a pane of glass, so that the 41 years of one honest hand would keep another 40. The entry that named Susanna a wife. The entry that named Verna a daughter. Safe, read now and again by folks who came to hear the story of how a far book saved a near woman. And the others, you'll want to know. Harlan Vane paid the accounting. 19 years of dollars with the interest near cleaned him out, and the section that was to have made him a lord went out from under him entire. He lives in a rented room in town now, over the feed store, and does not go to church, where once he sat up front. Lucretia's name is where she wrote it. On the mortgage. A matter of record, in a book, the way she liked things done for other people. She keeps no family's ledgers anymore. And the elders who spoke of careful books, well, they learned that autumn that a book keeps you as surely as you keep it, and that the truth runs a longer ledger than any deacon ever did, and posts every entry, and never once forgets to carry the one. Verna never spoke a hard word about her father again. She'd got what she wanted, and it was never the land. It was her mother's name in a book, set true at last. It was the $1 a month she'd paid for 19 years turning out to have bought her. In the end, everything. She's out on that porch most evenings now, they tell me, with the hymnal on her knee, watching the light go gold over ground that was always hers. That's the story. That's the whole of it. Kept and told true. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to know how far Verna's story has traveled.